Welcome to Savage Worlds GM Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. This episode brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Go check them out tonight at Roll20.net. You got to mute it. Oh, hold on a second. I have to mute it. Damn it! Okay, one of these times, guys, real quick, we're gonna have a perfect intro. I can feel it in my bones. Tonight we are flying Daveless. Dave's got a case of the ick, so we're gonna be flying without a rules maven. So all bets are off. I guess we can make up all kinds of wild shit and have nobody to correct us, right? So tonight we're talking about using one shots, designing one shot adventures as a foundation for a campaign and campaign design. With that in mind, and rolling it in. Here to discuss it, some call him Jib.
Hello!
And Dustin, the Savage Intern.
Yeah, boo-boo.
So, let's get started. For those of you who are new to Savage Worlds and Savage Worlds community, there's a thing called a one-sheet. It's a lot like a one-shot. It's intended to be a small 2 to 4 hour con game, an introductory game. If you have the Savage Worlds Deluxe Core rules, you'll notice that there's a section in there called Savage Tales. That's a collection of different one-sheets throughout a number of genres. It's got a space genre in there, a Viking story, standard fantasy story as well. So one of the things that we've talked about in this program before about designing a one-sheet, how to do a one-sheet adventure, and it's a simple, present a very simple problem as your plot.
Mm-hmm.
Leave it completely wide open as far as the solution. You don't care what the solution is. You may have some ideas about what they may do. Go ahead and feel free to, if the party decides to do this and make some obvious choices that you can anticipate, go ahead and have some I don't necessarily want to say counter maneuvers, but have some responses chambered. But for the most part, it should really be an open-ended, open world kind of thing. Now, that said, one sheets are very railroady, and I think anybody sitting down in a con game to play understands that, oh, this isn't supposed to be an open world player agency speeches. Everybody just sort of tends to punch their ticket and hop on the train because they understand we're trying to get this done in 2 to 4 hours, and everybody just tends to go along with it.
Well, okay, here's the thing. One, a one sheet is a lot like setting up a con game. Okay? And at a con game, you have a specific amount of time, like 4 hours, to start, get characters handed out, get everybody on board, get the game moving, and get it concluded. The start of a campaign is much the same way, in that you got to get everybody moving. So there's going to be a little bit more heavy-handedness on the part of the GM to get things moving. Well, the one sheet facilitates that because it makes a very simple equation. Okay? That doesn't make it a bad thing, and it doesn't mean that once you've presented the problem and gotten it and everybody's moving, you're then going to go, well, you must follow my story. No, it's a starting point. Okay? And when I'm setting up a game, I tell my players, here's what's going on in the game. Make a character that would get involved in that, because if you don't, I'm leaving your ass behind. So, yeah, just my spin.
I don't disagree at all. I'll throw this out there too. There's a lot of GM. This is something that I have enveloped and taken to heart from the Happy Jacks RPG podcast. One of the, I would say, almost column approaches of the show is, hello, my name is a GM. I work in the problems department, not the solutions department. It's not my job to come up with solutions to the problem. It's my job to drop the live grenade in the middle of the room, step back and go, game on, bitches. What do you do now? And then as a GM, react naturally with some consistency and continuity in the plot world in regard to the NPCs and characters in the way that they're going to react to your player characters' decisions and actions.
So one of the things that I think, going off of what Jib said, and sort of merging that with what you're talking about, Jared, when you're really creating a campaign from the jump, those first couple of adventures are really about establishing the tone of the world. Everybody wants to like live in this fantasy that you can have a full sandbox, but the truth of it is every game I've ever played has either a legitimate or an implied tutorial. And you could even say that if you start out a campaign in Savage Worlds, going from novice to season is your tutorial level. So the GM has like these first sets of adventures just so people know where they are, where they're going, or what their choices and where they're going. And you build that framework for the society that you're playing in. Now, if you get to the sandbox later on, like maybe the third or fourth adventure, that's understandable, but you can't just run around killing Joe Generic because he's there.
Well, I would say this. I would say that you can have the illusion of a sandbox. You're never going to have a true sandbox because you're the GM, and your story part of your job is story. If you run a true sandbox, here's what happens: the GM shows up and goes, "All right, guys, where are you? What are you doing?" And everybody just stares at the GM like, "What? I don't know. Throw us down a plot hook, something we can run with." And I would use this analogy: being a GM in more of an open world campaign setting, if you want more of an open world campaign setting, is a lot like being Walt Disney in 1955, 1960. I got this idea for a theme park. Now I'm going to call it Walt Disney World or Walt Disneyland, and I'm going to have, I'm going to have a Space Mountain, or indoor roller coaster with a space theme. I'm going to have a people mover. And you know what the attractions are in your theme park. And you have some idea of where they're located, how they work, and what's going on. Same thing holds true for, here's what happens over in Dragon Mountain if I'm running a fantasy. I have this idea, this rough sketched out idea that once upon a time, a baby dragon, blah, blah, blah. Oh, wouldn't it be interesting if the town actually relies on the dragon for protection and it's part of their culture? Boom. I've created a roller coaster over here in my theme park. Mm-hmm. And it's independent of the players. It's independent of the characters. If the characters decide to go visit it, I know what's going on there. So it's more, to me, your open world game is more about designing a theme park style where you know what the different locales and events are that are happening in your world, at least on some conscious level. You may not be completely thought out or prepped out, but if you anticipate they're going there, or as a GM, you get an idea halfway through because it's something the players have done of like, oh my God, I got this great idea.
Right.
You've given
it some idea. You've got some idea of what's going on. That we've talked before and about the misnomer of the sandbox game. The misnomer is that, well, if a game is sandbox, by definition, it's good. And that's not true. The inverse is also true. By definition, if a game is somewhat confining, that does not necessarily mean it's bad.
Well, let's shift the word here. Let's say it's structured. You know what? The difference between a coloring book and a notebook is the lines.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people are like, no, just let me be free. Let me be expressive. Now, the alternate end of that is I'll be in games with people that really believe so heavily in the sandbox. And they're like, well, what do we do? I don't know. We can do anything, right? And then you get this other group that's just like, well, okay, we're going to rail against the system. Here's the obvious objective. Let's go destroy it.
Well, you know, I would argue too, say, okay, let's carry that metaphor of a sandbox even further. A sandbox is fun, but essentially boring until one of the children decides that the other kid is playing with a toy they want to play with. And then now we have conflict, and now we have drama, and now we have a fucking story. Otherwise, we got a utopian society where everybody gets along and is playing and doing their own thing in the sandbox.
Even a utopian society, though, has story elements to it, because you have to ask yourself, how do we maintain a perfect society in an imperfect world? There's got to be like Morlocks living under the town, pumping gears out to make the plants grow or something.
It's all a computer simulation, man. Whoa.
Yeah, you can see it if you smoke this.
All right, so I see that Dustin's dropped a comment here. What from Carlin Kendrick? Why don't you go ahead and read that off for us? We'll kind of
Carlin Kendrick says, "Got to say the same thing when providing pre-gens. These characters would get involved in the problem at hand. If you can't figure it out, if you can't figure out based on the sheet, make something up."
Yeah, it's audience buy-in. It's suspension of disbelief. I mean, if you could poke holes in Suicide Squad all day long, but the premise is, all right, they're the anti-heroes, they're the bad guys who are going to come together and work together as a unit. No good reason for them to. Oh, except for the explodey thing we have around your neck and all the shit we have on you that you really don't want to happen. Okay. So coercion of play, whatever. But I mean, I know we've kind of talked about that before. It's worth mentioning, but I mean, it's almost a given that you're going to be a party who shares objectives and a reason for adventuring together. I would hope.
Well, let's look at it from the other side for a second. What's different about a player character who refuses to embrace the premise of the story, of the evolving story? How is that intrinsically different than the GM who says, "By God, you will"? They're opposite sides, but they're both trying to impose their will.
Yeah, you've got a conflict of ego on that one. There's an issue with, and I almost feel like that is the player themselves not even really wanting to be part of the group, having some kind of psychological desire to take over the group. And yeah, no, that's going to mess up the game in any capacity. Okay, Jared, you want me to read that?
Yeah, go ahead and throw that one out there from Alex. That's
Alex,
a good point.
Alex Musley had a successful one-shot as a Session 0. It was set 20 years before the campaign, and the characters, the players made for the one-shot, became NPCs in the campaign. That sounds like a good idea.
It's a good idea. You could also make it a generational story too, right? So if you want to just use popular media, go ahead and run Rogue One as your 0 session before you start episode 4, New Hope, as your campaign. Use this as an introductory. And I think what we're all three of us are saying here is when you build a one sheet as a foundation for your campaign, make it the introductory storyline. It's there to set the tone of the world and what's going on in the world, and gives your players a chance to experience it. And we were talking in green rooms right before the show of something as simple as saying, what would be really interesting is I want to start off an adventure. This is from a Google Plus post in the Savage Worlds community. I want to start with on a ship at sea, and the main inciting incident that brings the characters all together is this horrific storm that pops up out of nowhere. And that's what I want the first session to be about. Combat can happen, but there's no real reason for them to be in combat. They're not fighting anything in particular, but how the characters interact and deal with that situation. Do they end up going overboard and washing up on a nearby island? Do they weather the storm? What kind of happens? It's kind of an interesting introduction as a one-shot, even if you don't go to a campaign world. I would argue that as a GM, it helps to bring in the Steven Spielberg, Indiana Jones formula to things, or even the Bruce Willis Die Hard formula into things. Let's make things appear to be very, here's the objective. Oh, here's the cliche, obvious thing. Oh, but you didn't think about this thing that's happening. Oh, and this thing that introduces itself in the middle of it, and this thing, and next thing you know, you're not just breaking into this Aztec temple to steal a golden idol and bypassing one trap. Oh, now your guide has betrayed you, and now you got to throw him the idol head in order to get the whip, in order to get across this chasm that's ever widening to even get out and survive. Oh, and then you find out he's dead. Oh, and you trigger this huge boulder trap. Now you're running for your life through all these traps you've already avoided that you know are there that could kill you at any moment, to dive out of the front of this cave only to be surrounded by pygmies with blow darts and your arch nemesis taking the idol from you, laughing at you, and then ordering the pygmies to kill you as you run as fast as you possibly can to the biplane with pontoon legs on it waiting on the river to make your escape.
And there's a snake in the plane.
Exactly. So it's a very multi-layered, high-intensity conflict after conflict after conflict after conflict. And I think that as GMs, we kind of don't think in 3 dimensions when it comes to presenting characters with a problem or players with a challenge. We tend to think one-dimensionally, and it's not necessarily bad. I mean, you can have a pretty good plot idea and a fun game off that, but the more complexity and more conflict that you add into it, all the better. Go ahead. What does Jason have to say, Dustin?
Jason Chapman, that is an amazing buy-in for the players. I had a session that led to a campaign involving the characters play sinister characters because they wanted to explore dark ideas they built up. That kind of gets me thinking about something. Why not have a one sheet where the players act as the villains, and then the next couple of adventures they act as the heroes trying to unravel what the villains did?
That's an interesting idea, and I think it's a good idea. For me personally, the only difference between good guys and bad guys is perspective. But I think it would be very interesting to, take kind of an extreme example, put the player characters in the position of being the orcs who don't have a place to live anymore because up in the mountains and it destroyed their village and they're the remains and they need a new place to live, and this is really the only viable place they have. And there are, humans living in that village. What are you going to do about that? And just to see how they approach that particular.
Right. Well, and this kind of set up too that Jason and Alec are both suggesting could work great as the introduction to a Supers campaign. Play as the villains, but the player characters play as, a League of Doom type character base, so to speak, where they're all villains working together, pulling off a major heist. And then see how well they do, and then roll in the next campaign session with, okay, the player characters have already established who the villains are for you, what their motivations are, how they play. And then now you guys create Supers. And the characters you played last time are each one of your nemesis.
So if we're going to talk about one sheets, I think we're talking about the idea of one sheets becoming like points in the plot point. And Jared, you're mentioning the gradual increase. For those of you who had backed the Savage Rifts Kickstarter, you know that they had done that. They had started out, they had lots of one sheets, but I think it was John Geoff actually was part of, he had constructed a mini campaign out of 5 one-shots, and they revolved around just the recurrence of characters and those characters coming into danger, and they sort of built on them. You could play each one individually, but when you combine them together, you had a campaign just by the fact that there was a common thread linking all of them together. Carlin Kendrick says, my one shot that became a game buy-in was having the players go up against graboids from Tremors. The only way they were going to get out was to work together or be lunch.
Yeah, and if you want to build a campaign, where it's a graboid world, what happens after? What happens after the movie Tremors? Do they all get famous?
They get more graboids.
Yeah, there are more graboids. Is there a breakout? Is there a government conspiracy of graboids? What's happened? Is it all due to oil drilling in Texas? What's happening? That the campaign allows you to broaden the scope of the story and tell more of the background, more of the lead up. So I mean that's kind of what we're hinting at with tonight's episode with one shots and beyond. It's the one sheet beyond. Use that as your foundation and introduction to your campaign. And it can just, and here's the thing too, your one sheet doesn't necessarily have to have plot points or spoilers or secrets into it. It can be a great gateway to figure out what, and really kind of tighten down what kind of game the players really want to play. Because I know as a GM, a lot of times I'll hear, ooh, we want to play something like this. And then you go and build a campaign, you play a session, and everybody's like, meh.
Well, some games
don't. You guys said you wanted to play modern military. Yeah, but, with a lot more action and bigger guns and superpowers. Okay, nobody said that.
Right. Yeah, nobody said you wanted to be superheroes.
So, and I'll give you an example of a one sheet that I'm working on right now, hopefully for publication. It's a one sheet based off of the last time we had a one sheet or one shot discussion here about a modern takes place Desert Storm era. It takes place in Afghanistan, kind of a modern with a horror twist and angle on it. So here's an idea, and here's for this one shot that I'm working on. A bunch of radical insurgents release a djinn with the idea that they're going to weaponize it and use it. Only thing is, it turns on them before any one of them can declare themselves to be its master. And at sunset, it has to return to this. It either has to possess a willing victim, or return to its lamp at sunset. The heroes are nothing but a bunch of just low-level grunts, Marines, whatever, who are dispatched to this small little village where it's happened, because intel is telling them they think it may be a Taliban or a radical insurgent staging area and training camp. Secretly. So they're sent out to just sort of drive in, investigate it, make good with the locals, get them talking, and come back and report. They're not intended to be out there as a combat unit. They're not supposed to engage any enemy whatsoever. They show up to this town. It's deserted. Nothing in it. And this little girl appears and keeps trying to play hide and seek with them. And eventually leads them to this mosque and this whole thing where they're encountering this djinn who is playing mind tricks with them, trying to get them to allow it to possess them. Very simple idea as a one shot. You got a clock on it. There's a time limit on it. It's very clear cut as to what the objective is for the players. It's very clear cut. They understand exactly what's going on pretty much the second they're in it. Like, okay, we're familiar with the whole idea of a Humvee and desert camis. And, firing guns, woohoo, we get to play a modern military, but it's got a horror twist to it. Now, if you wanted, you could then take that adventure and go, okay, now we're just going to play basic standard modern military with supernatural elements put into it. Or maybe they're brought into like an FBI or special project CIA as part of your campaign world where they hunt down supernatural monsters and shit in a modern era. Just saying, the one sheet's a very isolated, limited introduction to a story or a campaign world that gives everybody a chance to be familiarized with the tropes. Holy crap. All right, Dustin, which one do you want to tackle first? I see
Uh,
a lot of activity in the chat room tonight.
let's
Great
go.
corn gravy.
I know we've got some chatters. We got some chatty Cathys up in here tonight. That's okay. We like our chatty Cathys. I'll start with
That was terrifying, Dustin.
Here,
Don't
I'll take Alec Boozies. You can't have a proper discussion about one shots without mentioning Gnome Student's book, Eureka 501 Adventure Plots. Yes, I can, because they're not a sponsor of this goddamn program.
sponsor
Next.
us and we will mention you. We will plug your book. We like it.
No, in all seriousness, it's a good resource.
Yeah, it is.
Really, it's a good resource.
it is.
Go ahead, David J. There, Dustin.
As Dustin knows, I had a bank robbery one shot to start my Supers campaign, but pregame I had them talk about their earlier conquests to both hype them up and lay the seeds for future adventures. So, full disclosure, I'm actually in a superheroes game that is run by David J. And we spent a couple of minutes, like in our session 0, actually talking about some of the superhero adventures that we'd had and sort of just building these fun little characters through their history. And the one shot that was stopping the robbery was what brought us together and had people sort of get to know us.
But the question at the end is, were you talking about former adventures or former conquests? Because that's a whole different game.
It is. I think we were talking about former adventures. Super Dude has not taken over any small island nations that we know of.
I was going to say, if you're talking about conquests, now you just turned it into Monster Hearts. So,
All right, and then finally, Jason. The other one from Jason here.
Chapman that?
Yeah,
wait a minute.
very last one.
Yeah, I see it. Jason Chapman that is an amazing buy-in for players. Well, that's good for him. I had a session that led to a campaign involving the characters playing sinister characters because they wanted to explore dark ideas. Didn't we already do that?
Yeah, we did. We're talking about the very last one at the bottom.
Yeah,
Jason
scroll down.
Chapman, for myself, I knew I had it.
Okay. For myself, I knew it had to be easier, and Savage Worlds was the... Wait a minute. You're starting in the middle of things. The fuck? Okay. For myself, I knew it had to be easier, and Savage Worlds was the only generic system which allowed me to realize why I'm spending 14 hours to come up with a solid adventure. The whole school modules were, and it ends. The fuck?
Yeah, no, it doesn't. I've not lost my mind.
I am confused.
I get it.
But I would say if you're spending 14 hours to come up with an adventure, you're over prepping.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really take that much effort. And now if you're spending time writing, interesting, fun and interesting characters for them to encounter and keeping them in your pocket, okay, sure, carry on, have a good time. If you're writing plot for 14 hours, maybe you ought to write a book instead.
Right. So let's talk about. So here's the extent of what I would do as far as plot preparation for a session. Okay. So last time we're running in a pulp era game. They came out of a Nazi diamond mine that was actually a staging ground for a point of invasion in Sri Lanka. Okay. So there's this huge rope bridge that connects the opening of this cave to the next available landmass. All right, so we're going to start out with the adventurers crossing a rope bridge suspended over this enormous canyon, 300, 500 feet off of the surface of a river running below it. Go. There's Nazis coming out of the... I know there's going to be Nazis chasing them out of the cave. And, angry natives on the other side. Okay, go. That's all the game prep I need to do, because anything I do beyond that doesn't matter, because the players are going to make their own decisions about what happens next.
Right.
Now, I need to be in a position to react to that when they do it,
right,
without sitting there going,
Now, knowing the world, knowing the people in it, And knowing just in general what the people in it are like is very useful to me, because I don't know what they're going to do, or where they're going to go, or when they're going to wander down the street and talk to the old lady in the house to try to see if she saw anything. And I'm going to have to make that up on the fly. But not that ever happened or anything.
Or they want to go to the morgue and investigate, start at the morgue and investigate the body.
Or go to talk to the medical examiner about, what he found when he examined the body. Why would you do that? Because it's a murder mystery and you're a doctor. That's why you would do that.
You bring up an interesting point here, Chib. The first campaign that I ran was a Deadlands Noir campaign, and one of my players was a detective,
right?
Who never did anything related to being a detective. He would go to a crime scene and he would just insult all the witnesses, and then he'd leave and he'd start doing world building stuff. And I'm sitting here thinking, man, what are you doing? Someone just hired you to look in on a mystery, and we had a mad scientist that he just built things. I said, okay, law of percentages, just keep rolling till you get ones.
That is a case of a player making a character other than the character they actually wanted to play. They made a detective, but that's not what they wanted to play. They wanted to play a thug.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Which, if you want to play a thug, that's fine. Make a thug.
Right.
We'll make the game work with that.
I think in a lot of cases the GM can and will actually try to accommodate the players. I mean, if they're a good GM, we come to game brews and want to have fun. I mean,
if you're not a good GM, fuck them anyway.
Well, okay, so if I'm the GM in that situation where you tell me as a character you're building a private eye in a Deadlands Noir game, and you don't ever do any actual footwork, you don't ever actually interview anybody, and you're not doing anything that comes anywhere close to resembling detecting for more than one session, by the way, I'm going to put it this way, it becomes a constant trend. I'm going to have your clients start showing up pissed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna have your clients go, "Hey, motherfucker, I paid you good money.
Right.
Where are those photos?
Oh,
you don't have my photos? All right, give me my money.
I
don't have your money. Okay, well then here's a beating.
Here's a lawyer. The lawyers are ruthless.
Right.
I ended up making him into a crime boss, and from there I ended up, that one player ended up becoming the big bad of the whole campaign. It was astounding how that happened. I don't know, but I think we might have just lost Jib there.
I think he just had to go handle something real quick. I think something happened there at his broadcast location.
Gotcha.
But I mean, so we're talking about we've talked a little bit about using the one shot as a lead in. How do you actually go about building a one sheet? I mean, how do you build a one sheet?
So there are two very, very basic plots, right? Mm-hmm. The characters go on an adventure, or a stranger comes to town. You got to have a reason to either go or a reason for someone to come in. So you have your traditional MacGuffins, you have the Maltese Falcon, you have the Rabbit's Foot, you have the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, those things. You have an opposing force, If you look at how some of these stories are structured, there has to be like a cost for not acting, like Indiana Jones. If he doesn't, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of the more hilarious scenarios, because if he doesn't do anything in Raiders of the Lost Ark, it still ends the same way.
That's a good point.
Yeah, but in most stories, though, like in New Hope, if they don't use the exhaust flaw, planets get blown up.
Right.
Well,
If
okay.
things get blown up, the Empire wins, and we have darkness and despair for 1,000 years.
Right, but let's talk about specifically building a one sheet for Savage Worlds, not a whole campaign world just yet.
Okay.
So how would you go about building a one sheet for Savage Worlds? For me, it's come up with an interesting tagline that you would see on a movie poster, a blurb, something that condenses the story that you want to tell in the one sheet, condenses that story down to a TV guide description or a TiVo description of what that story is about. So if you take a look at the Savage Worlds book, for example, the salvage of the USS Kane under the sample adventures just reads, the USS Kane drifts in the cold reaches of space. The crew of the salvage vessel USS Clark discover the Kane and ventures out to discover its dark secret. Okay, so a salvage crew in space comes across a derelict spaceship.
Yep.
That's there's your seed for your one sheet.
And
go ahead.
And as a player, if we sit down and you go, okay, so here's the elevator pitch for what we're doing. Like, I'm on that. I got that. I'm gonna make a character that's like, great. I'm making a character who's part of a salvage crew. What part am I gonna take in that equation?
Right. And you may start assigning like some ideas like, okay, well, you guys are sort of working. Do you guys are you freelancers? Do you work for a large corporation like you would in Aliens, in the Aliens universe for Winsangi, Wayland, I can't remember the name of the corporation.
Wayland Utonics?
Yeah. What's the deal? Are you guys military? Are you paramilitary? Are you just straight up salvagers? Are you pirates? You're gonna, what's the crew gonna need? Well, you're all gonna be experienced, I would hope, with some spacewalking in evac suits, like space suits with little jet thrusters on them. I would think that would be happening. But as a GM, on the GM side of it, like, okay, that's the tagline for the players. As a GM, what's waiting for them on that ship? Because I know you and I both know it's not going to be a simple salvage mission.
Oh, hell no.
So, oh my God, this is really Event Horizon. That's what that ship is. That ship is derelict because it's traveled through an interdimensional portal to hell. And now it's become the focal point for hell coming through into our world. And when they get on the ship, there's all kinds of like undead and weird shit crawling on the walls.
Right away, though. It just looks like an empty ship at first.
Right. And then there may be clues.
Go to shit.
Right? There may be clues. Oh, okay. Well, the players are probably going to explore maybe like, a medical bay, engineering, the bridge. These are places that they're likely to go in the adventures. So I might want to have some very brief description. And if you look at if you study that one sheet, that's exactly what you get. You get a map of the bridge, captain's cabin, crew quarters. There's also the galley, engineering, and a laboratory and ship stores. And each one of them just has a little blurb under it. There's literally like a handwritten 2-sentence note. Like the bridge says, the Kane's navigational equipment needs extensive repairs before she can be piloted. And then each repair attempt takes an entire day and is made at a -2, in addition to any penalties from 0G. So you have some idea about what they're going to encounter on the ship, where they're going to encounter it, but it's very just a brief sketch layout of what's going on. So you as a GM know what happens if they go, well, we want to get the ship functioning. Okay. So you're not caught completely off guard. But the resolution, completely up to the player characters. There's any number of ways they could resolve this issue. Maybe rig the self-destruct button on a timer to go off and blow the ship back to hell. Maybe try to find a way to close a portal. I'm not saying this is a plot of the USS Cade, by the way, in case you're looking at that sample adventure. But you have some ideas about what's going on in the ship, and then it's just a simple one act play, really. But it's more of an improvisational sketch as far as your notebook is concerned for the one sheet. And it's meant to be brief. It's meant to be succinct. You're not supposed to spend 20 hours creating a one sheet. It should be a 1 or 2 hour event if you're just scrolling down little two sentence paragraphs about what happens.
Right. The main thing to remember with a one sheet, in my opinion, is keep it brief.
Yep.
Don't get wordy. You don't, because this is for you to see. This is for you to have cues to do things in the game and to understand what's going on. It's not to write the book of the game. It's to give you cues. You don't have to write prose. It doesn't have to be even good, writing. It just needs to be clear and tell you what's going on.
Right, and unlike D&D modules that you may be used to from the past, a lot of people like to compare a one sheet to. You're not on a railroad on a one sheet. On a typical Savage Worlds peg one sheet, completely open. Doesn't matter if they visit the galley first, the bridge first, engineering first.
Right.
Just doesn't matter. They want to split the party. They want to split up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I remember one. I forget which one it was, where there was a certain ordinality to things, but it was because there was a time element to the game, and things happened at particular times.
Yeah, I mean, if it makes sense for the story you're telling, and
Right.
you're on time clock, yeah.
But by and large, it doesn't matter what order you do things in.
Right.
I think one of the things you got to consider is when you're throwing things out there, the universe exists as these options are given, or as they question, well, can I go here? Can I go there? That's when the place begins to be a place, when the idea of it is born. So with a one sheet, like say the SS Kane, they develop conciseness in that there is nothing outside of the ship, except for maybe the salvage ship. I mean, you can't just say, okay, well, I'm going to run down to the local gas station and buy gasoline to make Molotovs. No, you can't do that. Or in the Viking adventure, you're like, okay, well, you're out in the frozen waste. It's like, okay, well, I want to run to the next village. Okay, give me some vigor checks. -2, -4, -6. You die of hypothermia.
Right. Well, and one of the things too, like I'll just keep going back to the salvage of the USS Kane as an example of a good one shot. It just states in there, hey, so they're going to have to use evac suits, actually get into suits and do a spacewalk to basically get to the airlock and get into the derelict ship. Or you may just do a dramatic, this isn't written anywhere in the game, by the way. You may decide as a GM, you know what? It'd be more interesting for the piloting of the crew to do a dramatic task to line up their airlock with the ship's airlock and make it easier for them to go back and forth. And now they're connected. Someone run a dramatic task, see what happens. And if they fail a dramatic task, they screw up their docking mechanism and have to make a spacewalk. But the thing that the USS Kane does very well is it anticipates some gameplay issues. Like, do the players need to be in an anti-grav like spacesuit once they're inside the ship? No, life support's functioning. Even though it's derelict, life support's functioning. Artificial gravity, though, no. That's another situation.
I would make that a problem they had to find a way to overcome.
Here's what I would do. I would make it a clue to what's going on in my Event Horizon scenario twist of this. Is the ship has no life support, no anti-gravity, except near the main quantum engine drive, where there is full life support and gravity.
Right.
Not made by anything on the ship that they can tell. Just because it gives it a wait a minute. Ooh, spooky vibe.
So I ran the one sheet, the salvage of the SS Kane before, and I threw in a little twist. My players at that time killed anything that came through the door. No questions, no assessing the situation. And they killed literally anything that popped up in front of them. They're like, it's a zombie, shoot it. They go all the way down to the engine room, and They killed the captain and the engineer who were trying to repair the radiation leak. And we have gone from this scenario in which they had space zombies to the point where they had crazy space pirates who'd murdered everyone, which for my players led to an interesting discussion as to maritime law in space and why you can't just get on a boat and kill anything you see. Follow-up adventure was a court-martial.
In my Twisted Event Horizon scenario, they get into a full combat, kill everything, and then the second later, they're standing there in the hall looking at each other. Like they just had a full-on hallucination. No wounds, no nothing. Full-on Dallas Bobby steps out of the shower bullshit moment because
I go a little darker than that. They have the full-on combat where it's full fight, but when the fight ends, they all blink and wake up and pick one character, one really vital NPC or one character. They're dead.
That they've killed and murdered completely.
And they're all standing there with bloody knives going, the fuck?
Yep. So let's say we're going to use the USS Kane as an example. It's a little bit creepy, just naturally the way it appears in Savage Worlds. But let's say, okay, I'm going to build a campaign world off of this. Am I building basically a semi-hard science fiction game at this point? Is that kind of what I'm presenting? Do all the adventures take place in space and their salvage crew? Or is that just an introduction to, hey, this one sector of space, weird shit happens out there? And then I start building a game or campaign world. I mean, I guess that's a question I'm asking. We're talking about designing and here's what we've already said too about the one shot. There's a very clear terminating point. Like, oh, the ship's going to explode. The engine's going to overload at a certain point, and they just basically have to get clear of the ship before it goes kaboom.
Right.
And that ends the one sheet. It's experience this. Here's a real simple tagline. Here's what's really going on. Here's some areas they can investigate. Here's some little plots that are happening here and there. Big picture, shit's gonna blow up in 45 minutes. They have 45 minutes to figure this out or get the hell off the ship. Boom, end of story, end of one sheet. Thanks for playing.
Right.
And that's how all one sheets go, by the way. Should be very simple. Conflict introduction, resolution, done.
Don't be clever. Don't be clever.
That's one of the big issues. Like you really hit the nail on the head when you're being a GM. Don't overthink yourself. Don't overthink yourself, because if you try to like make something that's philosophically smart, people are just going to think, "What the hell, man?"
Well, it's your what's the word? What's the phrase I would use? You're all icing, no cake.
Right.
You're presenting something. You're basically committing fraud. You're presenting this idea to the players on the surface. Oh no, this is a bang bang shoot 'em up Western, and we're basically going to play the Magnificent Seven as a one sheet. Won't that be cool and fun? And the next thing you know, it turns into, oh no, there's zombies of every man that's ever been shot down, and the town is actually haunted. And whoa, dude, what the fuck? I thought we were going to play a simple shoot 'em up. I expect a barroom brawl, maybe some gambling, maybe a duel in the streets. But what's with the freaking zombies and the witch madam of the whorehouse? What? Sacrificing children? What the hell? This isn't the game I signed up for. What the hell are you doing? Yeah, don't try to get clever or do not pull. Oh God, what's his name? Oh, M. Night Shyamalan it. Do not M. Night Shyamalan it. Do not try to get twist at the end. Just
what a twist.
Okay, now I'm angry. I have to mention something. One of the things that's always pissed me off about what was the Mel Gibson movie he did that M. Night Shyamalan did with the Mel Gibson movie and the Alien Invasion? What was the name of that piece of
Signs.
shit? Okay. Why in the hell do aliens whose bodies react to water like acid come to invade a planet that is over 80% water and can manage to build a complex enough engineering feat to take care of interstellar travel, but can't work a goddamn doorknob? What the hell?
They're not aliens, they're demons.
Okay.
It makes sense if you think about it.
They can't come in your house unless you invite them.
Right. And water is the
Holy
antithesis. Yeah.
Right.
Like they spend so much talking about she's a holy child, she's a blessed child. No, she's not a weirdo. She's got the arcane background blessed, and she's cast smite on all this water.
Yeah, but still. Okay, so that's how you win any argument, even when you're proven wrong, boys and girls. You just say yeah, but still. So let's use the salvage of the USS Kane as a example into a springboard into a campaign world. Mars colony. Are we gonna do a world that's basically The Expanse on Showtime, where Earth is pretty much a political body now, very, very lowly populated. Mars is a military colony. And then we got huge space mining in the Kuiper Belt. We running an aliens kind of world. I mean, what are we?
If we're going with Event Horizon, then I would say what happens when the players leave? Like, do they cover it up? Do they go back to their lives? Do they take something with them if they survive? If they all die, then they have to send somebody to investigate where they went. That maybe they didn't own the salvage ship. Maybe the bank sends someone to retrieve it, and they find the wreckage of the Kane.
Right. There's all kinds of possibilities. The thing I would do is I would wait until I see how the one shot plays out before I would even try to start on the rest of the game.
Right. Ask the players, what do you think?
I want to see what happens. I want to see how they're going to characterize the game from their side. That's the big thing right there, is because when I know what they're going to do and how they're going to approach the game, that tells me what they're going to be interested in next and where they want the game to go from there. So I'm going to introduce something like that. And it also gives me the opportunity to get to know the characters and make whatever we do next personal to them.
Right. If they end up using the same.
So to riff off of what Dustin was saying, so the bank sends out a crew to find out what happened to their now missing salvage ship, and for at least a couple of members of the crew, maybe more, depending, it's going to vary. You have some personal connection to someone on that ship. You knew them, you were friends with them, you were lovers with them, you were related to them, whatever. It's going to be up to you to pick at least a couple people and say, what is your personal connection to the people on that ship? Character that you played before. Okay?
Nice.
So look at the person to your left and remember the character they played in the one shot. How does your character tie to them?
Right. How are they related?
Yeah.
And then you're getting player investment in the campaign world,
right,
and in the story as well. And you've already set the tone that you're playing you still have some sub faster than light. You're not doing Star Trek warp engine across the galaxy and getting there in 30 minutes. You're not going to travel through an entire hundreds of thousands of parsecs in the blink of an eye. You don't have that technology, but you can get pretty far distances in a year or 6 months if you're in cryogenic stasis, kind of like the way that the aliens kind of handles it You go into a deep cryo and you kind of go accelerated sublight, subspeed of light. You still have basic modern military. The technology level is already kind of set. Meds are set. Things like that are set. And then you're just building a campaign structure based on really what the characters decide to do with the first adventure, and how you're kind of building a plot point in a lot of ways if you're going to design a campaign around a one shot that leads into it, and then link those players into it, bring them into it. Any tips on campaign building that you guys want to share? I mean, other than having an idea of what some of the large meta plot points are in the game world, I really never focus too much on like drawing a map of the world or geography of the world.
I say break out the adventure generator. Don't feel too arrogant that you don't use it. Go ahead and break it out and roll up 5 adventures. And when you roll up those 5 adventures, see if they can be separate and also work together, because that's 5 points that add up that can sort of build off of one or the other.
Right. Well, I would say too, just extend your plots to the next logical step based on what happens from story to story. I mean, you can sort of fill in. So like for one thing, for example, if we're saying we're going to kind of pervert the USS Kane into Event Horizon, if you're going to build a ship capable of interdimensional travel, it's going to be a huge investment in that. Just from a monetary standpoint, huge investment.
Mm-hmm.
What if the salvage ships was sort of given, kind of led to that point, kind of directed to that point, shoved along that line, and now one of the people that was on that passenger ship from the character you played last time appears in your game, but they're actually an android who's downloaded the plans from the main ship, and it's slowly driving them insane, or you're being hunted and you don't know why. As a group, you're being hunted and you don't know why, because one of the people was a plant on that original mission, and unbeknownst to you, they've sent you an innocent transmission or something that actually has the plans of that engine in it, and now there's corporate spies, the military, maybe they're chasing you. I mean, I'm just as an example of extending.
Yeah, and that's a great example. I just come back to my premise of play to find out what they're interested in, what matters to them, and who they are. And whatever you do, make it personal for them. Make it something that they care about. You know, because they're going to tell you what the rest of your story, what the rest of the story is. You don't have to go, oh my God, what am I going to do for a story? They're going to tell you. They may not mean to, but they're going to tell you what they want next.
Give us an example of a time that you've experienced that, Jib, and how you worked it into a campaign. Because sometimes it's good to kind of hear that in a concrete.
So I'm running this game, got these characters, and I've got, I know who the characters are because we've done session 0, and I've got these bad guys laid out. I know who some cool bad guys are, and some things that are going to be interesting for the characters, and I need it's like a toss-off bad guy, right, for a scene. So I have a toss-off bad guy. Toss-off bad guy does something. Oh, dear. Guess what all the player characters just totally fixated on? My toss-off bad guy became the absolute focus for the remainder of the game. All the rest of the stuff that I wrote, that I thought up, they didn't care. Didn't matter a bit. That bad guy was what mattered to them.
And what do they want to do? How did they want that story to progress and unfold? Was it kill him, beat the shit out of him, defame him?
It would have been out of the character of the game for them to kill her, so they captured her and put her in prison.
Oh, there you go. Right? It's just, yeah. If you're, I ran. I'll put it this way. I ran a game that, as a GM, completely pandered to my players. Biologically altered, sleeved, genetically altered super soldier space marines that could basically just a basic armor. They were photosynthetic, D12 strength, D12 shooting, just complete. They might as well have been freaking superheroes. With guns that had a chainsaw on one end that you could hit a button and it would switch between different calibers of ammunition and different types of ammunition. Going up against actual, like they go to this genetic research facility, and they just destroyed everything I put in front of them in graphic combat murder hobo fashion. They loved it. Absolutely loved it. So now, okay, I'm going to put you on a planet full of dinosaurs. I had characters picking up like basically raptors by the neck and throwing them off mountains and just having a great time. As a GM, I got 4 sessions into it, but I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. I feel like sick to my stomach. There's no challenge. There's no story developing. It's just a hack and slash one week after the other. But guess what? That's what the players wanted. They wanted to show up on a Friday and just let loose game session after game session after game session. So give them what they want. But make sure that you're getting some enjoyment out of the game too as the GM. You're a player as well. You should be getting some enjoyment out of it as well.
I got to tell you, Jared, that sort of over-the-top, mega-powered player sessions, like those Gonzo builds, Savage Rifts will give you those Gonzo builds.
Well, Rifts in general is going to go Gonzo anyway.
Oh, wow. Like
what version of it you're using. It's the nature of the game.
So once the party gets a glitter boy, there's really no need for anybody else to show up. So I ran that campaign. I actually took the one sheets and I combined them. I created an overarching mastermind villain that wanted to trick my players. And I mean, he was a greater demon build with time elemental aspects and techno wizard skills. He was designed to just be too powerful.
A wrecking ball.
A wrecking ball. Now here's the beauty of him. He tricked the players. He outsmarted them. I took some of the villains from the one sheets, and they were like his lackeys. They were the henchmen. So they got power-ups too. But in the process, the party would go to where the lackeys are. They would fight the lackeys, and there would be evidence that the main antagonist had been there. And it had just been breadcrumbs to get them to a temple where he needed a human being to operate a machine. So they get there, all of a sudden combat robots start flooding in. The players beat the combat robots down. They say, we got to get out of here. And the floor starts moving, and it looks like the party's in too much trouble. He opens the door and lets them out. Okay? They can't close the rift on one side, so they say, I know what we're going to do. This one guy uses his power and he makes a duplicate of himself. And the other guy, who's a master of technology, takes some of that technology and puts it in the duplicate's brain, and they send him in there, right? The demon was a master of technology, so they literally handed him exactly what they wanted, a sacrificial lamb, and he just never really used his powers. He just tricked them into doing what he wanted, knowing how they would react.
Nice. Well, and I think we should mention this too. Your campaign doesn't have to span 20 years.
No, it does not.
It can be 2 months, played every Friday, and then you're done with it. Wherever the natural conclusion is of the story, if you find a place to wrap it up. Leave it. I would say this. I would say if you're going to run a campaign for any length of time, one of my favorite things to do with a campaign is leave it on a cliffhanger.
Oh yeah.
get at just one point where the players have played enough in that world. They've wrenched every drop of fun out of that session and that campaign, put them in one last situation, cliffhanger, and they go, all right, fade to black. That's the end of the campaign, ladies and gentlemen. You're like, what?
Oh yeah, always leave them wanting more. Always leave them wanting more.
And I think we've pretty sufficiently talked about campaign design, right? Just to have some meta plot ideas kind of fleshed out, play it by ear week from week to see, where the story's taking it, let it evolve naturally. I would say really too, the biggest thing is play as much as you could come up with very interesting plot twists and meta plots and everything else. I think most campaigns suffer from a lack of credible 3-dimensional NPCs with their actual own motivations that are in direct conflict with the party as a whole or a member of the party. And to use the Indiana Jones again, Belloc in the first Indiana Jones is a great example. Indiana Jones is just in it for the money, basically. He just wants the Ark of the Covenant to be in a museum. Belloc wants to understand it. He wants to touch it, to experience it, to control it, to understand it. And it's eventually his downfall. And it's a great character. It's a great NPC. And that one character's motivation drives a lot of the plot.
Yeah.
And what happens in the first Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah.
He's always one step ahead of Indy, but he's a little too enthusiastic and ambitious because of his desire that he makes some stupid mistakes here and there, like digging in the wrong place, not thinking to reverse the image of the burn mark and the whole bit, the way he goes about trying to seduce. That said, very fully well thought out characters with motivations. And don't make your bad guy just your big bad just a muscle, mustache twirling guy that puts innocent women, ties them down to railroad tracks just for shits and giggles. He should, I'm trying to build a time machine because my daughter died and it was my fault and I have to correct this mistake. Yeah, but your time machine's going to destroy the fabric of space and time in the world. I don't care. That kind of, even as cliche as it is, there's a villain that's actually got a motivation, a reason for doing something other than just being contrary to the party and causing the problems. So unless we have anything else in the chat room, from the chat. Technical difficulties, no. A 007. What's the talk about the 007?
007, there's this theory that it's not been consistently the same person every time. It's like it's just a code name that they take over. Okay. So when you swap out a campaign with a GM after pulling a big upside like that, where do you go? Which, hey, we got next week's topic.
Well, on that note, until next time, this is Jared Savage, Daddy Gunning for Jib and Dustin, the intern, saying keep rolling and stay savage.